I used to stay late at school a lot during my senior year because I was part of the media club. Our school was old, built sometime in the late 70s, and after dark it felt completely different from how it did during the day. During class hours it was loud and crowded, but after everyone left, the building felt hollow. Every footstep echoed. Every classroom looked darker than it should have. Even the smell changed. During the day it smelled like paper and cleaning chemicals, but at night there was this damp odor in the hallways, like old carpet after rain. Most students hated staying after hours, but I honestly didn't mind it at first. It gave me quiet time to work on editing videos for the morning announcements. One Thursday in October, our club advisor, Mr. Lanning, asked me if I could stay until around 9 p.m. to finish exporting footage for the school football promo. My parents both work late, so I told him it was fine. By 7:30, everyone else had already left except me, Mr. Lanning, and one janitor named Rick. I remember hearing Rick's floor buffer humming somewhere downstairs while I sat alone in the media room with headphones on, editing clips. Outside the windows it was pitch black already, and rain kept tapping against the glass. Around 8:15, Mr. Lanning knocked on the door and told me he had to leave because his wife called about something at home. He asked if I'd be okay waiting another 30 minutes alone until my export finished. I laughed and told him I wasn't 5 years old. He left through the side entrance near the parking lot, and after that the building became unbelievably quiet. The silence felt heavy. Even with headphones on, I could notice it. I kept working for another 20 minutes until I realized I really had to use the bathroom. The nearest one was across the hall. I remember taking my phone flashlight because half the lights in that wing shut off automatically after hours. The hallway outside the media room was dim except for a few emergency lights glowing red near the exits. The bathroom itself was empty. I checked the stalls automatically out of habit even though I knew nobody else should have been there. While I was washing my hands, I heard a locker slam somewhere outside in the hallway. It echoed loudly enough to make me stop moving. At first I thought Rick was nearby cleaning, but then I realized the locker sound came from the second floor upstairs, not my hallway. I stood there listening for another sound, but nothing happened. The building went silent again. I remember telling myself schools make weird noises at night all the time. Pipes knock. Doors shift. Lockers probably don't close right. Still, I walked back toward the media room faster than before. As I got near the door, I noticed something that immediately felt wrong. The room was dark. I had left the editing monitors on, and the glow from the screens had been visible from halfway down the hallway earlier. Now everything was black. I stopped outside the doorway for a second. The computer fans were still running, but the monitors had shut off. I stepped inside and moved the mouse to wake them up. Nothing happened. Then I noticed the power strip under the desk had been switched off manually. I stared at it for a second trying to process why anyone would do that. I knew I hadn't touched it. My first thought was Rick. Maybe he was trying to save electricity or something. But then I noticed my backpack sitting open on the floor. I always zipped it shut because my laptop was inside. I crouched down and checked everything quickly. Nothing was missing. My charger had been moved though. It was wrapped neatly beside the desk instead of plugged in where I left it. I suddenly felt uncomfortable being there alone. Not terrified exactly. Just uneasy. I turned the power strip back on and waited for the computers to reboot. While they started up, I texted Rick asking if he'd been upstairs. He never answered. About 5 minutes later, while I was sitting there waiting for the video export to reload, I heard footsteps overhead. Slow footsteps. Directly above the media room was an unused third-floor storage area the school barely used anymore. Students weren't even allowed up there because part of the ceiling had water damage. I remember staring upward while the footsteps continued. They sounded heavy and uneven, like someone walking slowly while dragging one foot slightly behind the other. The sound crossed from one side of the ceiling to the other. Then it stopped completely. I sat frozen for maybe 10 seconds before convincing myself it was probably Rick moving equipment around upstairs. But deep down I knew it didn't sound right. Rick was a big guy who walked fast and loud. These steps sounded careful, deliberate. Then my phone buzzed suddenly on the desk, making me jump hard enough to knock over a water bottle. It was a text from Rick. It said, "Already left around 8. Thought you went home too." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I checked the time. 8:47 p.m. Which meant I'd been completely alone in the building for almost an hour. Right after realizing that, I heard the footsteps again. This time they were directly outside the media room door. I froze in my chair listening to the footsteps stop just outside the media room. At first I thought maybe it was a teacher or security checking rooms, but something about the silence afterward made my stomach tighten. Whoever it was didn't knock. They didn't move again either. They just stood there. I could see the narrow window beside the door from where I sat, but the hallway outside was too dark to make out anything clearly. I remember slowly lowering the brightness on my phone screen because suddenly I didn't want whoever was outside to know exactly where I was sitting. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the doorknob turned slightly. Just enough to make the metal click. It didn't open because the media room door locked automatically from the inside after hours, but hearing that knob move made my chest go tight instantly. Someone was definitely there. I stayed completely still. The knob moved again, harder this time, followed by a slow push against the door. I could hear the frame creaking softly. Then silence again. I kept waiting for a voice. Maybe somebody joking around. Maybe a janitor from another wing. But no voice came. I finally worked up the nerve to say, "Hello?" My voice sounded weak in the empty room. No answer. The hallway stayed silent. I grabbed my backpack quietly and slid it onto my shoulders. I remember thinking how stupid it would look if I called the police over some random person in the school, but every instinct in my body was telling me not to open that door. Another minute passed before I heard the footsteps continue down the hallway again. Slow. Calm. Not running. Not rushed. Just walking away. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore before moving. My first instinct was to leave immediately, but the nearest exit was down the same hallway the person had just walked through. I considered calling my dad to come inside and get me, but his job site was 40 minutes away. I finally decided I was overreacting. Maybe some maintenance worker had come in without Rick knowing. Maybe they thought the room was empty. I kept telling myself normal explanations while I packed my stuff. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Before leaving, I checked the security camera feed on the computer monitor. The media club had access to a few hallway cameras for school projects. Most cameras only updated every couple seconds, and half of them barely worked, but I pulled up the feed facing the upstairs hallway anyway. The screen loaded slowly. Grainy black and white footage appeared showing the empty corridor outside the media room. I stared at it carefully. Nothing moved. Then, after about 10 seconds, a figure crossed the camera view at the far end of the hall. I'd almost missed it because it happened so fast. It looked like someone stepping briefly out from around the corner before pulling back again. The image quality was terrible, but I could tell it was a person. Tall. Wearing dark clothing. I leaned closer to the screen waiting to see if they'd appear again. They didn't. I checked another hallway camera farther down. Empty. Another one near the stairwell. Empty. Then I switched to the camera aimed at the third-floor stairs. The image took a second to load. At first I thought the camera was frozen because the picture stayed perfectly still. Then I realized someone was standing there. At the top of the staircase. Completely motionless. The camera quality was bad, but I could still make out enough details to feel my stomach drop. The person appeared to be wearing a hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled up. Their face was too dark to see. They were standing half behind the wall at the top of the stairs like they were hiding while looking down toward the second floor. I stared at the screen trying to convince myself it wasn't real. Then the figure slowly leaned back out of sight. I immediately shut the monitor off. I don't know why. Panic, probably. My hands were shaking badly now. I pulled out my phone and almost dialed 911. But then I heard something that made me stop breathing for a second. A loud bang echoed from somewhere downstairs. Then another. It sounded like a door slamming open against a wall. After that came the sound of metal rattling violently. Lockers. Somebody was hitting lockers downstairs. One after another. The noise echoed through the building in bursts. Bang. 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 It moved down the hallway like someone dragging their hand across every locker door as they walked. I backed away from the media room door instinctively. The sounds kept getting closer. I could hear the locker impacts traveling toward the staircase leading up to my floor. Then everything stopped again. Complete silence. I remember hearing rain outside and the faint hum of the vending machines downstairs. That was it. Then came the sound I'll never forget. Footsteps running up the stairs. Fast. Not limping this time. Sprinting. I grabbed my backpack and shoved a cabinet against the media room door without even thinking. The footsteps reached the hallway outside seconds later. Then the doorknob started shaking violently. Whoever was outside slammed against the door hard enough to rattle the glass window beside it. I stumbled backward in panic, while the person kept throwing themselves against the door over and over. No yelling. No words. Just violent banging. The small window beside the door cracked suddenly, and for a split second I saw part of a face outside in the darkness. All I could really make out was one wide eye staring into the room before the figure pulled back again. Then the banging stopped completely. I stood there shaking, barely breathing, waiting for the next hit against the door. Instead, I heard something worse. A low laugh from right outside the cracked glass. Then a voice quietly said, "I know you're still in there." The second I heard that voice outside the door, every part of me locked up. It wasn't loud or angry. That's what made it worse. The guy sounded calm. Almost amused. I stood there frozen near the editing desk while rain hit the windows behind me and the cracked glass beside the door reflected the dim emergency lights from the hallway. For a few seconds nobody moved. Then the voice spoke again, quieter this time. "You should open the door." I remember my throat feeling completely dry. I grabbed my phone and finally dialed 911 with shaking hands. I kept my eyes on the door while it rang. The operator answered, and I whispered as fast as I could that somebody was outside the media room at Westbrook High and trying to get in. She immediately started asking questions, but halfway through giving the address I heard footsteps moving away from the door again. Slow at first. Then fading down the hallway. I told the operator I thought the person was leaving, but she told me to stay inside the room and wait for officers. I stayed on the phone while listening carefully. After about 30 seconds, I heard a loud crash somewhere farther down the hall. Then silence again. The operator kept asking if I could describe the person, but honestly I couldn't. All I had seen was part of one eye through the cracked glass. After maybe 4 minutes, I finally heard distant sirens outside. Relief hit me so hard my legs almost gave out. The operator told me officers were entering the building and asked me to stay where I was until they reached me. A minute later I heard men shouting somewhere downstairs. Then radios crackling. Footsteps moved quickly through the halls. Somebody banged on the media room door and yelled, "Police department." I rushed over and moved the cabinet away. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood there with flashlights drawn. I remember immediately looking down the hallway expecting to see someone hiding nearby, but the corridor was empty. One officer stayed with me while the other checked the surrounding rooms. I explained everything as calmly as I could, though I sounded insane even to myself while saying it out loud. The officer asked if maybe it was another student messing around. I told him no student would still be there at almost 9:30 at night. Eventually more officers arrived along with the vice principal, who looked irritated more than concerned. They searched the school for almost an hour. They checked classrooms, stairwells, the gym, even the third-floor storage area. Nobody was found. No signs of forced entry either. The only thing they discovered was that one side entrance near the cafeteria had been left unlocked accidentally. The police clearly thought it was probably some trespasser who ran once they heard sirens. One officer even suggested maybe homeless people sometimes snuck into large buildings during storms. But there were details that didn't make sense. The vice principal mentioned that the third-floor security camera had stopped working around 8:40 p.m. Right around the time I saw the hooded figure on the monitor. Another officer found fresh scratches around the outside handle of the media room door, like somebody had tried forcing something thin into the lock. They photographed it while I stood nearby trying not to think about what could have happened if the room hadn't locked automatically. My dad finally arrived around 10:15 looking furious and terrified at the same time. The police took one last statement from me before we left. I remember walking through the dark parking lot feeling like somebody was still watching from the school windows. For the next week, the whole thing became a rumor around campus. Somebody leaked that police had searched the school after hours because of an intruder. Most students exaggerated the story into something ridiculous, saying a serial killer had broken in or somebody escaped from prison nearby. I stopped correcting people after a while. I just wanted to forget it. But 2 days later, something happened that made everything worse. I was called into the principal's office during third period. 2 police officers were there waiting for me. One of them asked if I could look at a few photos. They showed me pictures of different men from recent trespassing arrests in nearby towns. I didn't recognize any of them. Then the officer slid one final picture across the desk. The second I saw it, my stomach dropped. It was the eye. Same shape. Same heavy eyelid. Same stare I'd seen through the cracked window. The man in the photo looked around 40 with short dark hair and a thin face. The officer told me his name was Daniel Pike. He'd been arrested 6 years earlier for breaking into schools and hiding inside after closing hours. Apparently, he had a history of stalking buildings for days before entering them. What really scared me was the next part. The officer explained that Daniel Pike had disappeared 3 months earlier after being released from a psychiatric facility 2 counties away. Nobody knew where he was. They asked if I was absolutely sure about the identification. I said yes immediately. The officer exchanged a look with the other cop before collecting the photos again. Then he told me something I still think about constantly. The previous night, another school 20 miles away had reported a break-in after hours. A teacher staying late heard someone walking outside her classroom door around 9 p.m. Security arrived before they found anyone, but one thing had been left behind in the hallway. A black hooded sweatshirt. Inside the pocket was a folded piece of paper with one sentence written on it. "I know you're still in there.